In the quiet, misty hills of the northern countryside stood a mansion that everyone knew. It was called the Blackwood Estate. For over 50 years, this house was the symbol of power, industry, and immense wealth. The owner, Mr. Henry Thompson, was a legend in the business world. He had built an empire from nothing, starting with a small steel factory and expanding into real estate, technology, and shipping. He was a man of iron will, respected by his enemies and feared by his competitors. However, time is the one enemy that no amount of money can defeat. At the age of 85, the great Henry Thompson was losing his final battle. He was bedridden, his once strong body now frail and weak. Confined to the master bedroom of the very empire he had built, Henry had two sons, but to the outside world, it was a mystery how two brothers could be so incredibly different. It was as if they came from two separate worlds. Richard, the eldest son, was born when Henry was making his first millions. Richard grew up in the golden age of the family. He was spoiled, given everything he pointed at, and he never learned the meaning of the word no. As he grew older, Richard became a handsome but cold man. He wore Italian suits, drove the fastest cars, and looked at people not as human beings, but as tools to be used. For Richard, his father was not a parent. He was a bank vault that was taking too long to open. Then there was Arthur. Arthur was born much later, during a time when Henry had realized that money wasn't everything. Arthur was a quiet child who preferred reading books in the garden rather than attending high society parties. He didn't care for expensive watches or luxury vacations. While Richard was busy networking with elites in the city, Arthur was usually found in the local animal shelter or helping the gardeners plant flowers. Arthur saw his father not as a tycoon, but as a lonely old man who needed companionship. The last 3 years of Henry's life revealed the true nature of his sons. When the doctors announced that Henry's condition was terminal, the house became silent. The servants moved quietly, the curtains were drawn, and the smell of medicine filled the hallways. During these long, painful months, Arthur moved back into the mansion. He paused his own life completely. He became his father's nurse, his reader, and his best friend. Arthur learned how to cook the specific soup his father liked. He learned how to adjust the pillows so Henry wouldn't be in pain. They spent hours talking about the past, about Henry's late wife, and about the meaning of a life well-lived. In stark contrast, Richard was nowhere to be seen. He was too busy running the company, or so he claimed. In reality, Richard was already spending his inheritance before he even received it. He was buying yachts, investing in risky ventures, and telling his friends that he would soon be the richest man in the state. He visited the mansion only once a month, and these visits were short and cold. Richard would walk into the sick room, checking his gold watch every 2 minutes, looking at his dying father with impatience rather than love. He wouldn't ask, "How are you feeling, Dad?" Instead, he would ask, "Did you sign the transfer papers? Or where are the keys to the overseas accounts?" The breaking point happened on a stormy Tuesday night, just 2 days before Henry died. The rain was battering against the large windows of the estate. Richard had arrived unexpectedly. He didn't come to say goodbye. He came because he was in debt. His gambling habits and bad investments had caught up with him, and he needed cash immediately. He stormed into the dying man's room, smelling of expensive cologne and desperation. Arthur was there, feeding his father spoonfuls of water. Richard pushed Arthur aside. He leaned over his father's face, his voice filled with aggression. He demanded access to the main family safe. He shouted that the old man was being selfish, that he didn't need the money anymore because he was about to die anyway. Henry Thompson, though weak in body, was still sharp in mind. He looked at his eldest son, seeing the greed burning in his eyes. He saw a stranger, a monster created by money. Then he looked at Arthur, who was standing in the corner, tears streaming down his face, not because of the money, but because he hated seeing his father treated this way. In that moment of thunder and lightning, Henry closed his eyes. He didn't argue with Richard. He simply said, "Go home, Richard. You will get what you deserve." Richard took this as a promise of wealth. He smiled arrogantly, patted his father's shoulder roughly, and left the house, believing he had won. 48 hours later, Henry Thompson took his last breath. He died peacefully, holding Arthur's hand. The funeral was a grand event. Hundreds of people, business partners, politicians, and distant relatives, came to pay their respects. Or rather, they came to see who would get the fortune. Richard stood at the front, wearing sunglasses to hide his lack of tears, accepting condolences with a fake solemnity. Arthur stood at the back, truly grieving, barely noticing the crowd. The day of the reading of the will arrived. The atmosphere in the lawyer's office was tense. Mr. Henderson, the family lawyer who had served Henry for 40 years, sat behind a massive oak table. He adjusted his glasses and looked at the two brothers. Richard was sitting on the edge of his chair, ready to jump. Arthur was looking out the window, watching the leaves fall from the trees. Mr. Henderson began to speak in a slow, deliberate voice. He explained that Henry had liquidated, sold off, almost all of his corporate assets in the final weeks of his life. Richard's eyes widened. He licked his lips. Cash. That meant liquid cash. Even better than stocks. The lawyer continued. He stated that Henry had left specific, individual instructions for his two sons. The lawyer turned to Richard first. To my eldest son, Richard, the lawyer read from the official document. I leave the contents of my private steel safe, located in the master study. You have always desired the power that comes from this safe. It is now yours. Richard slammed his fist on the table in triumph. Yes, he shouted, ignoring the solemnity of the room. I knew it. The old man knew who was capable of handling the fortune. He turned to Arthur with a mocking grin. Sorry, little brother. Business is business. The lawyer then turned to Arthur. And to my son Arthur, he read softly. I leave the contents of the old garage, including all the boxes, old furniture, and personal items stored therein. Richard burst out laughing. It was a cruel, loud laugh. The garage, he mocked. The place full of spiders and broken lawnmowers? Perfect for you, Arthur. Arthur didn't get angry. He simply nodded and said, Thank you. Those things have memories. They moved to the study immediately. Richard couldn't wait another second. He practically ran to the massive steel safe that was built into the wall behind his father's desk. The lawyer handed him a slip of paper with the combination. Richard's hands were shaking, not with grief, but with the adrenaline of greed. He spun the dial. Left, right, left. The mechanism clicked. It was the sound of victory. Richard grabbed the heavy handle and pulled the massive door open that he expected to be blinded by the shine of gold bars. He expected stacks of $100 bills wrapped in plastic. He expected diamonds, but the safe was dark. It was empty. Richard froze. He blinked, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him. He reached his hand into the cold metal box and felt around. There was nothing. No money. No documents. No gold. Just a single, white envelope sitting in the center of the shelf. What is this? Richard whispered, his voice trembling with rage. Where is it? Where is the money? He tore the envelope open violently. Inside, a single lottery ticket fluttered to the floor, along with a handwritten letter. Richard snatched the letter and read it, his face turning from red to purple. The letter was in Henry's handwriting. It read, Dear Richard, all your life, you wanted the rewards without the work. You wanted the fruit without planting the tree. You looked at me and saw a bank, not a father. During my final days, I realized that giving you millions would not help you. It would destroy you. You are addicted to easy wealth. So, yesterday, I donated every cent of my liquid cash, over $50 million, to children's hospitals and orphanages. The receipt is attached. However, I did not want to leave you completely without hope. You always like to gamble. Enclosed is a lottery ticket. If you are truly meant to be rich, perhaps fate will help you. But you will not get it from me. Good luck. The silence in the room was deafening. Richard screamed. It was a primal scream of pure frustration. He threw the letter at the wall. He kicked the heavy desk. He gave it away? Richard roared. $50 million. To charity? He was insane. He was senile. I will contest this. I will sue. The lawyer calmly shook his head. The doctors certified he was of sound mind. Richard, The money is gone. It is done. Richard stormed out of the house, cursing his father's name, leaving the lottery ticket on the floor like a piece of trash. He had lost everything because he wanted too much. When the front door slammed shut, a peaceful silence returned to the room. Arthur walked over and picked up the lottery ticket. He placed it gently on the desk. "I don't understand," Arthur said softly. "Why did he do that?" "He wanted to teach a final lesson," the lawyer replied. "But now, Arthur, we must attend to your inheritance." "The garage?" Arthur asked. "I don't need to go there now, Mr. Henderson. I just want to go home and rest." "Please," the lawyer insisted. "It was your father's specific wish that you visit the garage today." Arthur agreed. They walked out of the main house and across the wet garden to the old, dusty garage at the back of the property. Arthur remembered playing here as a child. He opened the creaking wooden doors. The smell of oil, old wood, and dust hit him. It was piled high with cardboard boxes, old gardening tools, and covered furniture. "It's just junk," Arthur whispered, feeling a wave of nostalgia. "Just like I remember." "Not all of it," the lawyer said. He walked to the back of the garage, where an old workbench stood. He pushed the workbench aside, revealing a small, modern keypad hidden on the wall. The lawyer typed in a code. Suddenly, a section of the garage wall, which looked like solid brick, began to slide open. It was a secret compartment, Arthur gasped. As the wall opened, lights automatically flickered on inside the hidden room. It was a climate-controlled vault, pristine and clean. Arthur stepped inside, his mouth open in shock. The room was filled with art. But not just any art. There were original paintings by masters: Van Gogh, Monet, Picasso. There were rare antique sculptures. On a table in the center, there was a stack of thick documents. The lawyer picked them up. "Your father knew that cash loses value," the lawyer explained. "He knew that businesses can go bankrupt. But he spent the last 10 years secretly collecting these masterpieces. He called it the Arthur Collection." The lawyer handed the documents to Arthur. "These are the deeds. And this," he pointed to a map, "is the deed to the land surrounding the city, which is now zoned for commercial development. Richard wanted the cash in the bank, which is temporary. Your father left you assets that are timeless." Arthur looked at the paintings, then at the lawyer. "How much is this worth?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The appraisal was done last week," the lawyer smiled. "The collection and the land are valued at approximately $120 million. You are the richest man in the city, Arthur." Arthur sank to his knees. He didn't cry for the money. He cried because he realized what his father had done. Henry had protected the fortune from the greedy son to save it for the good son. He had trusted Arthur not just to care for him, but to care for the future. In the end, Richard, consumed by his anger and debts, faded into obscurity, forever chasing a lucky break that never came. Arthur, however, used his wealth to build hospitals, schools, and parks. He never changed who he was. He remained the kind, humble man who knew that the greatest inheritance wasn't the gold in the vault, but the love in the heart. And every time he looked at the old garage, he smiled, remembering the father who knew him best.